Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we are very lucky to have a wonderful guest here, which happens to also be another Maxwell Leadership Certified team member. But more importantly, he is a business owner, a best-selling leadership author, and I just found out right before this, a dog rescuer. So maybe if we have some time, we'll talk about leadership and dogs a little bit. But we have Andy Neillie with us today. And Andy, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit better?
Well, Amos, thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm honored to do so. Yeah, I think you and I have found out very quickly we share some passions together. I've been really passionate about people who are in positions of influence, using their influence well for many, many years. And the good Lord's allowed me to grow a small leadership consulting business. I do workshops and training, and have written a few books, and work a lot in the trades and work a lot in financial services. I'm just passionate about leaders leading better. I think part of my story, like so many of us, started out with an anti-mentor. I had a couple of bad bosses early on. It wasn't even early in my career. These were like college jobs, working construction crews, and Jerry had an anger management issue, and he would take it out on the crew. And I became a Christian early in my life, and I'm reading the biography of this servant leader on the one hand, and then I'm going to work for a guy that's yelling at us and throwing tools at us on the other hand. And I'm thinking, it's not supposed to be this way. It's not supposed to be this way. And that awakened in me a passion. Really, here's my passion: no bad bosses. But that's not a good marketing line. And so, we turn managers into leaders is what I'm really passionate about.
So I believe in your doctorate dissertation, you focused on the personal side of leadership a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I've been looking at leaders for more than 25 years now, trying to figure out the equation. There's 1,000 books on leadership that are published every year, and 10,000 blogs and podcasts like you and I are doing, trying to figure out what really makes a good leader. And I've boiled it down. I think if managers are working in 4 areas: conviction, competence, character, and covenant, they can begin to realize that they're not just a manager, they're moving toward becoming a high performing leader. And probably at the foundation of that is this whole character piece, Amos. That truism, you'll never be a better leader than you are a person. I saw this demonstrated, unfortunately, with another anti-mentor a number of years ago. I was doing some leadership development in Australia for a global technology firm. And I had a bunch of people in a workshop setting. You and I do workshops. I had a bunch of people in a workshop setting. The managers were sitting in the back on their laptops. And I'm not exactly sure what exactly transpired, but at some point, something popped up on one of the managers' laptops that should not have been on a laptop. And a buzz started amongst the managers and somehow percolated into the team members. And Amos, I'm not overstating it to say I saw that person lose the ability to lead that team in about 10 minutes as they realized this guy is surfing sites nobody should surf, and I'm working for him. He lost the ability to lead. That whole character piece. Are you fair-minded? Are you other-oriented? Are you self-sacrificing? At the end of the day, people choose to stay in jobs because of their boss. They join for the job, but they leave because they got a bad boss. Are you and I becoming the leaders that they're happy to work for? Really, I know that's a lot of your passion in your work is employee retention stuff.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure who coined the phrase, but I use it quite frequently. People don't quit jobs, they quit people. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And even in today's day and age, it's even becoming more prevalent where maybe in 1950, somebody was willing to stick it out because there was a good retirement. But today, I think having a good experience for most is more valuable than having a good retirement.
I fully agree. Two things. One, our culture is not as career minded. We're not looking for the company man as much anymore. And then secondly, the employment environment is rich in choice right now. You and I are both getting things pushed to us on LinkedIn all the time that, hey, there's job openings here, there's job openings there. Our team members, our employees have a lot of options. Why should they stay with you and me? And these 4 leadership necessities, the character piece we've already touched on, I'm convinced when you develop yourself in these 4 areas of conviction, competence, character, and covenant, part of what you're doing is you are ensuring to the best of your ability that you're doing the things that will help with employee recruiting and employee retention.
So you've worked with a lot of companies all over the world, Fortune 500 companies down to small trades companies.
Right.
Will these tactics work? Tactics is the wrong word. Will these principles work in a Fortune 500 as well as Joe that's running a masonry company and only has 3 employees?
Yeah. I've done a little bit of executive coaching of executives at the highest level of Fortune 500 companies. But even inside those Fortune 500 companies, most of my work has been with a regional team or a vertical team where they've got 125 employees that they're responsible for in the Western U.S., or they've got Australia and Japan. And so even in those Fortune 500s, I'm working with leaders that have a span of influence that's similar to what Wall Street would call an SMB, a small and medium business, 500 people or less, and 500 million in revenue or less. At that level, I am absolutely convinced it works. From, you and I laughed, the Chuck in a truck who had a single truck 10 years ago, and today he's got 40 trucks and is trying to learn how to take care of his people so they take care of the business, up to that regional manager of a medical device firm that has the Western U.S. When they work at becoming high-performing leaders, people want to work for them.
So interestingly, and today, I thought we would talk about specifically, just how leadership plays into retention. But with what you just said, can leadership help us to attract the right people as well? And kind of how does that work? Because many times a leader is thinking, well, what I do inside the company has no bearing on what people think about outside of here. So is that true? And how does that work?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very true. And you and I, in fact, already alluded to this before you turned the recorder on, because you and I both know our own consulting and coaching and the workshop businesses. Most of our business comes from word of mouth and referrals. People that said, man, Amos helped me, Andy helped me. Yeah, you should think about having him come in and help your team as well. The same is true for employers. The kind of the irony of it is, there's a lot of stuff today out about culture, and you need to have your core values up on the wall. And the very first day, there needs to be an orientation in the workbook that's got, our company culture. Amos, you and I both know, here's where culture is really caught. It's not that first hour with HR or that first 90 minutes with the company owner. Here's where culture is taught. It's when you leave the company owner's office and you walk down the cubes and somebody leans over and say, "Psst, new guy, come here. Let me tell you what it's really like." And that's when culture starts getting embedded. And it's those people that are telling the true stories of the company that are your best recruiters, they're your best retention people. So in some respects, the most important job of a leader, I mean, it's important to find new ground, right? Part of this whole conviction piece is you see the bigger picture. You know new markets to go after. You know how to increase your top line and strengthen your bottom line. Part of it is you building a culture where people say, man, I'd rather work for Amos. Yeah, that other place is offering me $1.25 an hour more, but it's not worth it because Amos understood when my spouse needed some extra help and I had to kind of go beyond the personal time off policy. Amos made it work. That's what attracts people and keeps people.
So you just said something, and I'm going to go to a completely different subject just for a split second and have a little bit of fun with it, because as you were talking there, you used both of our names consecutively, and it just hit me. Now, many of the people listening probably don't remember them, but of course, with my name, I do. And I just thought we should launch a new podcast. It's going to be the Amos and Andy Show, right?
Amos and Andy. And the only people that get it are going to be at least 55 years old, I think. Old communication.
Now, hold on. I'm only 25.
Oh, yeah. You've got the voice of a 25-year-old.
Sorry, I couldn't help it. That was too much fun. So when we're talking about retention, though, I have run into people that occasionally have the thought of, one, well, it doesn't matter if we have high turnover because we're getting different people. And when we find the right ones that fit my organization, they'll stay. Or, well, every time I get a new person, at least I'm getting different set of skills and maybe I'll find something. How do you work with somebody to make them understand really what the impact of retention is?
Yeah. It's interesting because you and I have both been on websites, and we could take a minute and chat GPT right now. Hey, what's the high cost of employee turnover? And, for frontline workers, it's thousands of dollars. For senior people, it's tens of thousands of dollars. And so the reality of it is it costs something. Now, I have to admit at times, Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, 20 plus years ago, he said, get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus. Don't even worry about the seats at first, just get the right people on the bus. And so in some respects, going through personnel so that you can find the right people and get them on the bus, I agree with that philosophy. I have been guilty, I own several local small businesses, and I have been guilty of keeping people too long that I should have let go. And in fact, my first expensive leadership mistake was a day that I was told to fire a worker, and I fought for her job. And my boss said, all right, you can keep her, but you got to put her on plan. I went into a meeting with her planning on having a very hard conversation about all her performance. Amos, she quit on the spot. Not only did she quit, she's swearing, she's yelling. She was one of my top salespeople who had some serious character flaws, but was a good seller. And she quit on the spot and walked out. And I'm sitting in my office wondering, what am I going to go say to the rest of my sales team when she just left? And Amos, there's not even a good story. So many of these podcasts are kind of that humble bragging. Let me tell you how smart I was. There was nothing smart about this. I kind of stumbled out. She left. She went across the street. She went to work for a competitor and took business from us. Nothing good from this situation that I didn't handle correctly. But here's what I learned. I walked out into the bullpen with the rest of my sales team. Before I could say anything, one of my salespeople said, well, that took you long enough. They all knew she needed to go. They thought I had finally fired her, which was the right thing to do. We've got to be strong. Leaders, managers get the easy conversations. Leaders get the hard conversations. You want to keep the right people, you've got to have hard conversations. But you can't have a revolving door. You'll never achieve maximum efficiency if you're saying, well, they didn't work out. We got to go find somebody new who's going to bring fresh blood. There's a bit of truth to that, but you're deluding yourself if you think you're not getting the best from people who come and stay.
So many times, we, from the outside looking in, maybe we see a business that has been historically very good, low turnover. Then one day you start noticing, this can be your local convenience store, and you start noticing all of a sudden there have been people there for 5 years, and now all of a sudden there's people changing. Now, you and I, as leadership folks, probably, at least I know I do this, then I start to kind of pay attention, look, watch, and say, what's going on here? I'm curious, And sometimes you'll hear people say, well, this has been a challenging time. Our business isn't as good. Things aren't, so on and so forth. And so my question is, I believe sometimes great managers can become, and great leaders can become terrible leaders in challenging times. Can your 4 principles help you to make it through a challenging time as well as a good time?
Yeah. I really think they are. They were tested, 4.5 years ago when COVID hit, and we're all trying to figure out what's the future going to look like. And then, you just call them my 4 principles. There's nothing new in leadership in the last 2,000 years. You get past Jesus Christ and Marcus Aurelius. We all have our own voices. You and I are Maxwell people, and John Maxwell has done a great job. I think he's been recognized as the greatest leadership writer of all time. even John Maxwell really doesn't have much new stuff. It's just what voice do you have that resonates with a certain market or audience or leadership team? And yeah, I'm absolutely convinced one of the things that attracts people and keeps people is this first leadership necessity conviction. Is the person I'm working for, do they believe in what we're doing? Are they seeing the bigger picture? Do they make it fun to come to work because this is an exciting place that's doing important work? That's that first conviction piece. Leaders, they need to quit suffering with their eyes down and get their eyes up. That attracts and keeps people. And then the second one, the whole competence piece, conviction. Now competence, am I being given the tools to do my job well? One of the things that I need to be able to do what's expected of me. Is my manager helping me execute? So do I get the training? Do I get the equipment? Do I get the space that I need? That whole area of competence. An effective leader, people stay because they get to show up and have the satisfaction of a job well done. I knew what was expected of me, and I was given the tools I needed to perform. So that's a second piece of retention. The third piece we've touched on already, this whole area of character, and it really blends into the fourth element. And Amos, it'd be interesting to talk with you about this fourth element. It took me a while to figure out what I was seeing. For a while, I called it alignment. That wasn't a C word, so it didn't quite fit my little construct. I called it consistency. I called it consistent communication. And then I recognized it's covenant. Covenant, it's kind of an old-fashioned word, although Guy Ritchie did a movie, I think 3 years ago, called Covenant. Typical brutal Guy Ritchie movie, but a very powerful message in the movie. Here's what covenant looks like. In fact, I live in the state of Texas. Got a lot of young people around me. When they get married, it's romantic, love and affection till death do us part, all of that personal side. What people don't at times realize when they're approaching the altar is there's also an official document signed by an officiant and recorded with the local county clerk. There is both a personal and a formal side to a covenant. It's not a contract, and it's not just let's hold hands forever. It's really both. And when I realized that's what good leaders do, they hold people to account. Hey, we've got production quotas. We've got sales goals. Whatever the team is I'm leading, I've got to hold people accountable to their response. Oh, and by the way, I will make extra PTO available to that person whose spouse is having a difficult pregnancy or whose parent is struggling with cancer. And they balance the tension of leading people and managing things. They never get it right. Amos, you and I both can tell stories of mistakes we made earlier in our career, falling off one or the other. But leaders wrestle with what's the right decision and how do I enter into covenant with the people that are under my influence? I'm convinced we get those four right: conviction, competence, character, and covenant. And we're on the way to becoming high-performing leaders. I don't know if we ever get to the end of that journey, but people will come, people will stay. I own a number of retail businesses. In the retail environment, high turnover is a way of life. And I've got managers that have been with me for 15 years, and it's changed their lives. And it's us stumbling together. How do we learn to inculcate these four principles into our culture?
So interestingly, your last one of covenant, one of the things that I often talk with people about is, and so often, especially in medium-sized businesses, the person that gets to a leadership role, and I'm saying leadership in air quotes, they are just somebody that did really, really good at their job and they get promoted, right? And so getting them to understand what the difference between a manager and a leader is, and I think it falls in, it's just a slightly different way of saying it, but a manager really only manages time, resources, all of those things. And a leader is there really for two things: encouragement and to remove roadblocks for everybody else so that they can get their job done. And so I think it's the same type of scenario.
I think, in one of my workshops, I've got a section where we talk as managers about what does it mean to be a champion for your team. And that's what you were talking about, removing roadblocks, right? Sometimes you have to have hard conversations as a mid-level manager up because you're protecting your people underneath you. That's the removing roadblocks. That's at least part of the removing roadblocks. Here's the other thing that I would add to your good insights for that high performer that got promoted into a leadership position. They just have to recognize my goal is not to be a high performer anymore. It's to make my other people high performers. I've worked with a lot of sales teams over the years, and one of the challenges of a newly promoted sales manager is they were typically the biggest bonus winner last year, and they carried the biggest book of business. And now all of a sudden, their job is to make their team members perform better. And for some of them, that's a hard challenge. In fact, I admire any number of people I worked with over the years who are a manager for a couple of years, and they said, you know what, I just want to go back into being a bag-carrying salesperson. That suited me better, and good for them for recognizing that.
I often tell the story that when I first got out and got my first job, my father, which was he was a hourly employee in a machine shop his entire life, a couple different machine shops. And he kept coming to me and so how's work going, the typical stuff. And I would tell him what I was working on. And he kept warning me and saying, why are you trying to upskill all the people that work there? Because one of them's going to take your place someday. And I remember telling him, and I was only about 20 years old, and I said, that's the whole point. I said, when I get to the point that I can sit in my office with my feet propped up and everybody else is going about it, then there's an opportunity for me to move to the next position and me to bring one of those people along. Yeah. And so getting people to understand that it's okay to help people and to give as much information as possible. But like any good principle, what are we taught? We have to have a way to measure it, right? So how do you measure this? How can we work and realistically look at and measure our success or our improvement?
Yeah. Well, and you're asking the $1 million question. If you and I could write that book and publish it, it would become a bestseller. I was doing some online research as recently as yesterday about employee retention. I've got an upcoming engagement with a association of government workers who are struggling with turnover. And so I'm just trying to freshen some of my material. And Amos, the statistics are hard to come by. On the one hand, you can Google anything you want and find any statistics, but the real data is hard to justify because, in some respects, we're talking about soft skills, although it always makes me laugh because leadership is considered a soft skill. And I would maintain it's the hardest skill of all. Anybody can learn to read a spreadsheet. Anybody can learn to operate a machine. Learning to read people is a lot harder. So this soft skill is the hardest skill. I think the way it is measured is inside organizations where they can compare themselves against other peer organizations in terms of retention, in terms of recruitment, in terms of job advancement. But to be real honest, at the end of the day, there's no pure data that says, man, if you become a leader practicing the 4 leadership necessities, your retention rate's going to grow by 27%. Nobody's done that study, and I'm not sure how you would do that study because of so many variables out in the marketplace. I think the last thing I'd say about this is, in some respects, also at the end of the day, Amos, you and I have to be able to put our head on our pillow and know I've been a good person. I've not just been a good boss, I've been a good person. And so part of it is you just need to do the right thing if you want to be able to sleep well at night. And that means sacrifice. That means making mistakes that are in their benefit. That means admitting errors and being humble and recognizing you never really get it right. You're just always managing the tension of not getting it wrong too much of the time.
You mean to tell me that people don't like working for the guy that or girl that is always right and it's always somebody else's fault? And I'm confused. I thought they were the best people to work for.
Yeah. I mean, you and I do need to be careful because there are some of those inspirational leaders. My understanding is Steve Jobs was a horrible people manager, but people went to work for Apple because they were kicking a dent in history. And so there are some people that conviction piece is off the charts. They see things that nobody else can see, and people underneath them put up with bad leadership, because there's passion and vision there. But at the end of the day, the Steve Jobs, even the Elon Musks of the world, they're relatively rare. At the end of the day, the typical yard foreman, there are other yards I could go work at. And
Yep.
if you aren't for me, I'm moving down the road 3 miles.
Absolutely. So kind of thinking about this, and everybody's talking about how the different generations, the Xers, the millennials, and all the other generations that come next, do you see any changes coming over the next decade with not only the generation coming into the workforce, but all of the technology that is now advanced to us? I mean, are you and I out of a job and there's going to be 2 AI bots having a podcast?
Yeah.
What do you see?
Well, I'll make a couple of comments about that. I heard a quote a year ago that really has changed the way I do business. And particularly for folks like you and me, Amos, who are consultants and workshop leaders, and were brought in from the outside to add value. Her quote was, people in our world aren't going to be put out of business by AI, but we are going to risk business to people that are using AI well. And I would fully agree with that. I've won business in the last quarter because I was in the proposal phase against several other people, and I went and did some research and pulled together better information because I knew how to use AI well. And so I had a woman sit across the table from me and said, we like what you're saying better than the other 2 people. Well, what I was saying was simply current thinking, best practice thinking. So everybody out there needs to learn to embrace AI. If we take a step back, 80 years ago, 100 years ago, there were economists that were saying, hey, technological innovation is going to put the factory worker out of business. No, it hasn't. It's just allowed our economy to grow and grow and grow. So I think there's opportunities. Now, I got to confess, I'm not a specialist, and I know there are risks and fears about AI taking over, and that's not my area of expertise. The thing I will say generationally, I apologize, I got a couple of our rescued dogs playing behind me. That's the life of people that rescue dogs. I will say that I hire in my retail businesses a lot of 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23-year-olds. And there's a real challenge, and there's a real plus. The challenge is they are short-term. They've grown up playing video games where they won the trinket to put in the virtual treasure box since they were 3 years old. They want short-term rewards. And work is a long-term endeavor. So there's a challenge with them realizing, no, you don't get a promotion after being here for 90 days. In fact, you're still on probation after 90 days because you haven't gotten good enough to really make us any money yet. You're still costing us money, and they want a promotion. So that's the one challenge. The flip side of that is I find the people that are the youngest people that I employ care about culture and people and that stuff, and an environment where people are free to flourish better than a lot of older folks that just want to show up and grind. And I think there's some real lessons that we can learn from people that want to work at a place where community is important. I'm not sure how I do it balancing those 2 dilemmas of you don't get a raise after 30 days, showing up on time every day for a month doesn't get you a reward. That's just called work. Versus somebody that says, hey, can we all take the day off and go and work at the local nonprofit? And I love their thinking, and I'm trying to figure out how do I manage the tension of the many young people that we employ.
Interestingly, I have noticed there was a book, I don't know, 20 years ago. I forget who the author is, but it's called 1,001 Ways to Reward Employees. And actually, if I look, I think it's even on my bookshelf here. But what I found is over the past many years, like part of that, alleviating a little bit of that is I came up with ways, and for all of the business owners and C-suite folks that are listening, the important piece of this is not only does it help the employee and help that relationship, but there's also tax benefits to it, right? And so instead of giving somebody an increase after 90 days, the goal was, if you can make it out of your probation, I will give you a paid day off to go do this, or I will. And so that progresses.
You've blended them together.
Yeah. And so like I had a manager at one point that his favorite thing in the world to do was to go turkey hunting. And he wanted to, I forget exactly what it was with turkey hunting, but he wanted to go to a specific area and hunt a certain type of turkey. And it might have actually been in Texas. And so we found a conference, a management conference that was in the area at the right time of year. And I said, I'll send you to the management conference and give you those 2 extra days for you to go on this hunt.
Yeah.
He stayed forever because.
Yeah. And Amos, I would say you were the kind of person to help me figure out that's covenant. That's covenant right there. You still got to go to the conference. I need you to learn some stuff and bring it back to the company and take your shotgun with you because you're going to have fun.
Yep. So as we're coming to a close, I always ask all my guests 2 questions. And the first question is, what is that go-to book that you have used throughout your life and you continually pull off of the bookshelf and read?
Yeah, I can't give you one. I'll give you 3. Obviously, the Bible. I'm a person of faith, and I try to start many of my mornings with remembering again who God is and who I am. The second book, you and I have already alluded to, the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, that Amos, at this point, I think it just celebrated its 20th anniversary. It's an old book, but it's still a good book. And then the third one, not as many people know about, it's called The Discipline of Market Leaders. And this book is even older than Jim Collins' book, but The Discipline of Market Leaders, when I first read that book, I just realized this is a blueprint for how to excel as an organization, The Discipline of Market Leaders. Here's the problem with this book. It's 25 years old. It's written like a 25-year-old book. The chapters are long. The print is small. We don't think as hard as we did when those folks were writing those books, in the 90s or whenever. But it sits on my shelf. I'm convinced that's the book that I probably ought to reread every year, The Discipline of Market Leaders. So Good to Great, the Bible, The Discipline of Market Leaders. You and I could also recommend a ton of John Maxwell books to your listeners because the 21 Irrefutable Laws, the Awakening, he's just got so many good books. And yeah, so sorry about that. 3 rather than 1.
That's all right. And I mean, the only downside to all of that was I just realized that you just burst one of my bubbles. I told everybody earlier I'm 25, but you said the 90s was 25 years ago. And if that's the case, I guess I kind of forgot the age.
Amos and Andy show. I'm telling you, it's the Amos and Andy radio show.
So the last question is, what is your favorite piece of technology today?
Well, I'm not on social media very much. But I have an iPhone, and my family members all roll their eyes because Siri and I are really good friends. She tells me a lot of stuff, and she puts stuff on my calendar for me and puts stuff on my to-do list for me, and she gives me guidance where I need to go. I'm not a 25-year-old, but I'm a bit of a techno nerd when it comes to using Siri and I just realized in the last couple of years, I was on a road trip recently with my wife and it's integrated into the dashboard. And I would just talk to Siri to find us restaurants and to give us the right stops. And, she's laughing at times because I'm in a conversation with her. And all of a sudden I say, hey, Siri, find a local coffee shop. And Siri would speak up like she's about to speak up right now if I'm not careful. So
awesome.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope maybe I can get you back on and we can unpack a little bit more. Where can folks find out more about you and engage with you if they'd like to?
Well, Neillie Leadership. I've got a robust website with a number of resources on it. So NEILLIE, NeillieLeadership.com will get you there. And then you and I talked half an hour or so ago before we started recording. I've got a little ebook called The 3 Imperative Leadership Conversations. We talked about, managers get the easy conversations, leaders get the hard conversations. This little ebook dives into that, and it's available at the website leadershipmaterials.com. Very straightforward, leadershipmaterials.com, and your listeners can download this 8-page ebook.
awesome. And we will make sure that's in the show notes as well. So for our listeners, until next time, don't forget to check us out on social media and our website, and check out all of our back podcast episodes as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amos.